Hey y'all, buckle up because day 2 of Karen Read's pretrial hearing was a legal brawl for the ages. We had fights over expert testimony, forensic evidence, policing competence, and an outright war over what the jury is allowed to hear. If you thought day 1 was dramatic, day 2 took it up a notch. The defense came out swinging, accusing the prosecution of trial ambush, while the Commonwealth struggled to defend their experts' sketchy experiments. And when you thought things couldn't get any messier, the defense finally named the individuals they say are responsible for John O'Keefe's death. Yeah, we are in deep now. Let's break it all down. So the first thing we're going to start with is the fight over expert testimony. Prosecution's science under fire. The biggest legal battle of the day. The defense is trying to get Dr. Welcher's testimony thrown out. Now, Dr. Welcher is the biomechanical engineer hired by the prosecution to explain how John O'Keefe's injuries allegedly match Karen Read's Lexus. And what is the defense's argument? Dr. Welcher is not a medical examiner, but he's trying to give opinions on injuries, cause of death, and even forensic pattern recognition. He relies on contested witness testimony to reach his conclusions, which experts are not allowed to do. His scientific experiment was created just for this trial, meaning it has never been tested, published, or peer-reviewed. And y'all, when an expert makes up their own science, that's a huge red flag. What is the prosecution's defense? They claim Welcher's methods are valid and more thorough than the defense's own expert. They argue that biomechanics is a recognized field and he's just applying physics and engineering. But here's the problem. Without a scientific foundation, this kind of testimony is dangerous. The jury might believe it just because an expert says it. And why does this matter? Because the prosecution needs this expert to prove their theory that Karen Read struck John O'Keefe with her car. If Welcher's testimony is excluded, their case loses a huge chunk of credibility. My take on this is, I don't blame the defense for trying to get this thrown out. Courts are very strict about experts not stepping outside their expertise. And a biomechanical engineer trying to talk about wound patterns, that's not his lane. And let's talk about that experiment he did, because it is sketchy. And just what is this experiment that's causing a legal showdown? One of the most contested parts of Dr. Welcher's testimony, his homemade experiment where he dropped a hybrid mannequin head to simulate John O'Keefe's fall. And why is this a problem? No documentation. We don't even know how he did it or what data he collected. Never tested elsewhere. No other scientist has ever repeated this experiment to verify its accuracy. Not in any peer-reviewed study. If it's not published, it doesn't count as real science. And legal precedent alert. The defense cited Massachusetts case law that says experiments conducted just for trial are looked at with extreme skepticism because they're often biased, untested, and unreliable. And let's be honest, if this drop test was so scientific, where's the research proving it works? The prosecution couldn't provide any. My take on this, if this gets admitted, the jury is going to think it's real science. But without any legitimate backing, it's just a courtroom stunt, and the judge seemed very skeptical. So now we get to the trial by ambush accusation. What is the prosecution hiding? The defense dropped a bombshell accusing the prosecution of hiding evidence and trying to ambush them with last-minute surprises. So here's the issue. The prosecution provided over 8 gigabytes of evidence related to their expert. But the defense is saying that's not the issue. The problem is, where is the methodology? Where is the scientific study supporting his experiment? Why weren't they given time to review this earlier? The judge intervened and ordered the prosecution to hand over redacted slides by Monday so that defense isn't blindsided. So what's my take on this? This is not a good look for the prosecution. If everything is above board, Why are they dragging their feet in providing proper documentation? It just makes it seem like they're hiding something. Now we get to the third-party culprit bombshell. Who really killed John O'Keefe? And then it happened. The defense finally named names. Up until now, they had hinted at a cover-up, but now they went all in, telling the court exactly who they believe killed John O'Keefe. They named Brian Albert, Brian Higgins, and Colin Albert. And why is this huge? The defense is claiming that these men were involved in John O'Keefe's death and that police ignored or covered up evidence to protect them. The prosecution fought back hard, saying there's no direct evidence linking them to the crime. The judge asked the defense to provide evidence to back up their claims. Now, this is major. If the defense can provide that police ignored the evidence or protected these men, it could completely change the trial. But if they don't have solid proof, this could backfire hard in front of a jury. Okay, so to expand a little bit more, here are my final thoughts and what happens next. Hopefully I don't repeat too much. Well, let's break it down because there are multiple battlefronts in this case, and the next few weeks are going to be critical. Will Dr. Welcher be allowed to testify? As I stated before, one of the biggest decisions the judge has to make is whether Dr. Welcher's testimony is even admissible. And here's what's at stake. If the judge allows his testimony, the prosecution will be able to argue that John O'Keefe's injuries match Karen Read's Lexus. Again, the jury will hear about his drop test experiment, which could persuade them even if it's junk science. The prosecution gets to counter the defense's expert using biomechanical calculations to say that O'Keefe's injuries make sense with their theory. If the judge excludes his testimony, the prosecution loses a key pillar of their case because without Welcher, they can't claim scientific proof that O'Keefe was struck by a car. The defense will hammer this in court, pointing out that the prosecution tried to use unproven science. It raises serious questions about whether the state rushed to charge Karen Read without real forensic backing. The judge seems skeptical of Welcher's testimony, especially his self-made experiment. If she rules against it, this could be a huge turning point for Karen Read's defense. The prosecution has to hand over the redacted slides. Remember when the defense accused the prosecution of trial by ambush? Well, the judge wasn't thrilled about that either. Now the prosecution has to hand over their redacted slides by Monday. What does that mean? The defense finally gets to see the cleaned up version of the evidence the prosecution wants to use. It'll show what the jury will actually see when Dr. Welcher testifies, if he's allowed to. So if the defense finds more issues, or if the slides still reference witness credibility or improper evidence, expect another fight. So what is the potential outcome? If the slides are still problematic, the defense will likely file another motion to limit what Welcher can say. If they contain questionable information, the judge could rule that even more of his testimony needs to be excluded. This could slow down the trial, because every time the prosecution fails to follow the rules, the defense will challenge them in court. It's another moment where we'll see if the state is playing fair or trying to push the limits on what they can get away with. And just to keep it fresh in our mind, I spoke about the 3 men that defense finally named as the possible other 3 who may have been the ones who took John O'Keefe's life. Well, I kind of want to put a little bit more here about that. So what is at stake here? The defense is essentially accusing these men of murder. If they can prove a cover-up, this case could fall apart for the prosecution. But if they don't have solid proof, this could backfire hard. If the judge feels they're just throwing out names without evidence, they could be barred from mentioning this theory at trial. And again, as a reminder, What is the evidence they actually have? The defense has hinted at key evidence the police ignored or covered up, but we still don't have a clear, detailed picture of what that evidence is. Are they relying on witness statements? Do they have forensic proof? Is there cell phone data or physical evidence tying these men to the crime? Right now, we don't know. And again, that's a huge risk for the defense. If they can't back up their claims, the judge could severely limit what they can argue at trial. And possible outcomes, as stated earlier, if the judge allows this defense, the jury will hear two competing theories. The prosecution will argue that Karen Read hit John O'Keefe with her car, while the defense will argue that he was beaten at 34 Fairview and police covered it up. If the judge restricts the defense's claim, Karen Read's attorney will be forced to focus on reasonable doubt instead of proving an alternative suspect. This could be one of the most critical rulings before trial. I always think it's important to look at how this could impact a jury. No matter how the judge rules on these motions, the jury selection process is going to be insane. There has been massive public attention on this case, with people already taking sides. The defense will want jurors who are skeptical of police. The prosecution will want jurors who believe in forensic science, even if it's questionable. One of the biggest challenges will be finding 12 unbiased people who haven't already made up their minds. And so to keep this fresh in our minds, what's the defense strategy? They'll likely ask specific questions about potential jurors' trust in law enforcement. They'll try to weed out everyone who believes the police could never lie because their whole case is about a cover-up. They may also push for jurors who understand forensic limitations, since they're arguing that the state's science is flawed. And again, what's the prosecution's strategy? They'll want jurors who trust experts, even if their methods are controversial. They'll argue that reasonable doubt shouldn't mean making up conspiracy theories. They'll try to prevent too much talk about the third-party theory. Basically, this jury selection is going to be a battlefield. So, when will the trial actually start? With all these legal battles, you might be wondering how much longer until we get to trial. Well, jury selection is still set to begin in April, but with all these pretrial motions, there could be delays. The judge clearly wants to get things moving, but if more evidence comes out, another motion is filed, the expert testimony fights drag on, we could see more hearings before the jury even gets seated. So to kind of paint a possible timeline, if things go smoothly, jury selection starts on time in April. Oof, hope so. If there are more legal challenges, we might see a delay of several weeks. If something major happens, like a ruling excluding key evidence, the prosecution could be forced to adjust their case, which could push things back even further. I just wanted to make sure that I stressed all that, because one of the things that happens in these cases when there are things that come up like this are motions after motions after motions that pop up, and it just pushes everything back, and it's a struggle if you have no patience. Anyway, I am at the final take. Finally. So what is my final take? What does this all mean for Karen Read? This pretrial hearing was a defining moment for Karen Read's defense. If the judge rules in their favor, they'll go to trial with major wins, including limiting the prosecution's expert testimony and keeping their third-party culprit theory alive. If the judge rules against them, they'll have a much tougher road, because they'll be fighting against forensic evidence they don't trust without a clear alternative theory. One thing is certain, this case is far from over, and there are still major twists ahead. Whew, that was a lot. So what do y'all think? Do you think the defense has real evidence of a cover-up? Should Dr. Welcher's experiment be allowed in court? Will this jury be able to sort through facts versus fiction? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, because this case is only getting crazier. Oh my goodness. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next update. As always, stay safe, stay curious, and I'll see you in the next one.